is going to cover information sources. This is number one and the 10 things you need to know. The first thing I want to tell you is not all information sources are created equal. There's a lot of information out on the web about foreclosures. I can tell you that probably 50 to 60% of it is total garbage. There's a lot of websites out there that try to sell this information and give you the inside track. I've rarely seen that actually work for an investor. So I'm going to give you some tried and true methods as well as kind of tell you what to watch out for. So first of all, newspapers, they're a great place to look to see what's coming down the pipeline. Almost every state requires a public notice of default. So the bank is obviously going to be reaching out to homeowners by FedEx, UPS, US certified mail. They might even try to serve them in person. They have to give notice. But the state also says that they can publish it in a newspaper and that will cover them basically for liability. So the homeowner can't come back and say, I had no idea I was in foreclosure. Yes, you did. We gave you notice, publicly available. You could have looked if you wanted to know. I know that might sound a little shady, but I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, because I cannot tell you how many times in this process I have heard the homeowner tell me that they had no idea, and then I come to do the eviction. I know that sounds horrible, but it was part of my job. And they've got FedEx envelopes laying there unopened from their bank. Oh, really? All those FedEx envelopes and all those phone calls that you ignored, that was your bank trying to tell you that you were in foreclosure. So that excuse does not work. But as an investor, you can look at the newspaper and say, oh, hey, this house is coming up for a foreclosure sale. This is great. I'm going to keep my eye on it. I don't see a lot of success buying them before they actually sell on the open market, but sometimes you can. Like maybe it's your neighbor's house. It's up for foreclosure and you think you can get a good deal. You can go directly to them and say, hey, I saw in the newspaper you're up for foreclosure. I'd love to try to help you out of this. You just never know. There are a ridiculous ton of websites out there. Most of them are nonsense. Some of them have okay information, but they focus strongly on pre-foreclosures. They try to give you this inside track. Ooh, it's insider information. Pay us a subscription fee and we'll tell you all these foreclosures. So then they send you a list of all these pre-foreclosures. The problem is, pre-foreclosures don't always complete the process. Sometimes they're redeemed. Sometimes a family member bails them out. Sometimes the people work out a modification on their mortgage, something like that. Just because a bank has filed pre-foreclosure paperwork does not mean the house is absolutely 100% going to be a foreclosure. So it's a lot of garbage. I mean, it's just a lot of stuff that's not really going to apply to you. Also, I can tell you, I hate to call them out by name, but Zillow is a very popular website. They are not known for their accuracy. Any real estate agent will tell you that. We are not just giving you lip service about it. That's true. I mean, Zillow is not known for its accuracy, especially in the foreclosure market. They might give you foreclosures that sold 2 years ago. And they'll say, oh, hey, this is a new foreclosure. I used to get calls constantly as a listing agent about, well, it says, 123 Main Street, it says that your company has it. Yeah, we sold it 2 years ago. Like, I don't know why you're calling me about it now. So always verify the information. Don't jump to conclusions and go, oh, I got to get this house, and make all these plans around it. Call somebody, preferably a real estate agent, because the multiple listing service, MLS, that is a service that all realtors are a part of, or should be. That's the most accurate source of information. The banks are always going to require that their properties are on the multiple listing service. So every foreclosure that's on the market will hit the MLS at some point. So you can rest assured. This video is going to discuss the prospect of buying a property on the courthouse steps. That is not just a euphemism or a metaphor. This is literally what happens in most areas. The sheriff or the trustee's sale happens on the steps of the courthouse. Like, for instance, in Nashville, it actually happens somewhere else, but there is a physical sale that happens. It's like an auction. So a lot of investors get all excited now. I'm going to take my checkbook down there and I'm going to bid on this house. It's not as easy as you think. Don't expect a really good steal on the courthouse steps because, number one, the bank is there bidding against you. Don't think that you're going to pull one over on this bank. They have a $150,000 lien on this property. They're not letting you walk away with it for $75,000. So pretty much the mortgage balance is going to be the minimum that you should expect to pay. And you're going to know that amount from the newspaper that we talked about earlier. They have to disclose that amount. There's also going to be a lot of attorney's fees and interest that accrues too. So that amount, if you saw in the newspaper that the mortgage was for $150,000, you're like, wow, I know for a fact that that house is worth $175,000. I'm going to get a good deal. Well, by the time you add in everything, it might be up to $167,000 or $168,000. Who knows? So you just never know with the mortgage balance, but that's a good place to start. But just expect that the bank's going to be there bidding on it. Now, it could be that, and I've seen this happen, where maybe it was a very small lien. It was only $50,000 and the house is worth $150,000. Sometimes an investor can snag it out from under a bank. The bank's going to go, all right, I want it for, 50, 60. Okay, you know what? Forget it. I'll get my money, because the money from the sheriff's sale goes to the bank. So they might say, we're good, we're fine. But trust me, the bank knows how much that house is worth. They have already had the property valued before it got there. They had an agent go out and do a broker price opinion, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And they already know. So the bank might go, there's a potential for a windfall profit here. And if they see that potential, they're going to bid. So the courthouse is not the best place for a deal. Also, it's an as-is purchase. There is no inspection period. There's nothing. You are buying this house sight unseen, and you're not always guaranteed a clean title. You will get a sheriff's deed or a trustee's deed. Those are not like the warranty deed that you got when you bought the house. These are basically just conveying the bank's interests to you. I've seen absolute nightmares that I'm going to talk about when we get into title issues. It's not fun. So unless you are extremely, extremely experienced in purchasing houses of this nature, I really wouldn't try this. It's an option, but it's not a very good one in my personal opinion. So that is buying on the courthouse steps. The next video is coming up very shortly, and I look forward to seeing you soon. So now we're going to talk about property values. It's a very interesting subject when it comes to the world of foreclosures, and a lot of people misunderstand the situation. First, let me assure you, the bank is not ignorant of the value. First of all, they have had the property appraised probably several times. They actually have a licensed appraiser go out. Occasionally, they even have several appraisers go out to the property, depending if it's a tricky price. Then they also have a broker price opinion done. I've alluded to this earlier in another video. A broker price opinion is done by a real estate broker, and it is basically a comparative market analysis. It's not as in-depth as an appraisal, even though as a broker it sure feels like it sometimes, but it is a snapshot. It's 3 sold comps, 3 active comps. Comps is short for comparable. And it's basically what the broker thinks that the property is going to sell for. A BPO is done in order to set the market price. It's not a true value. But in my personal opinion, A broker price opinion, which is also called a BPO, which I'm going to call it from now on, a BPO is a lot of times more accurate when it comes to the actual final sales price of a foreclosure, because the broker knows the market and knows what the buyers are going to do. An appraiser just looks at historical values. So a BPO looks at a 90 to 120 day value. The bank does not want to sell the property immediately, because if a house sells within 2 to 3 weeks, the bank assumes that they underpriced it and that they could have gotten more for it. In fact, a broker will actually get penalized if that happens. A foreclosure broker will actually get a score, and that score can be based upon many things, some of which are how fast their property sold and the difference between the BPO value and the final sales price. So if they price it too high or price it too low, they get in trouble. If it sells too quickly, they get dinged. So it's a pretty accurate process. We also look at as-is versus repaired value of the property. So I might have a $100,000 house that in as-is condition is worth $100,000. But if the bank were to go in and do new carpet and put some new appliances in and put some new flooring in the kitchen and maybe repaint, I might be able to get 110 for that. So the bank wants to look at what's it worth as is, what's it worth repaired, how much are the repairs going to cost, and then they make a decision. The repairs might only cost them $5,000, in which case they probably would go ahead and repair it. The asset manager's job is to minimize the loss for the bank. So they want to get the highest price for the lowest expense in the shortest amount of time, but not crazy short. And they are definitely not in the habit of giving homes away. So that's a major a misnomer in the foreclosure market, that the bank is just desperate to dump this property and they'll take anything you offer them. Absolutely not the case. The bank has an expectation that they're going to get a good chunk of their money back from this sale. I briefly want to discuss short sale property valuation. I know this is not a short sale course, but I think it's an important distinction to make. Again, if you're looking at buying a property through short sale, you need to know the bank is going to require an appraisal. The bank is going to ask for multiple broker price opinions. I used to do these things for a living, and I knew when it was a short sale. They would let me know, this is a short sale, we're looking for the true value. The bank expects to get market value for that property. So I'm a homeowner, I owe $150,000 on my house, but my house is only appraising for $125,000. Then the BPO comes in and agrees $125,000. If I have an investor that says, hey, I'll give you $110,000, the bank's going to go, well, you can sell for $110,000, but you're going to have to cover the other $15,000 because we've got appraisals and BPOs that say it's worth $125,000. Well, the homeowner doesn't have that kind of money, so they're not going to be able to do that. So you, as the investor, have to be more realistic. And that's what I said earlier, that short sales are not usually the best place to get a deal. You're going to pay pretty close to market value for that property. You're not going to get in there and scoop it up for half price. You're usually not going to get it for half price as a foreclosure either. Also, with a short sale, the approval time can take months. I have seen short sales drag on for over 6 months. It's just a very long, drawn-out, annoying process. So just understand the different steps that banks take on both sides, short sale and foreclosure, in valuing their property. They want to get the most money they possibly can. They're not in the business of charity work. They're not in existence to give you a good deal. So it's important to go into this whole process with a very realistic expectation of what you're going to get from the bank. So that concludes our video on property value. The next video, we're going to talk a little bit about buyer representation. So I will see you very soon. So now we're going to talk a little bit about buyer representation. This is a step that a lot of investors don't think they need. I'm here to tell you, unless you are a pro at this, and by pro, I mean you've done this at least 5 or 6 times, you need to get an agent, a buyer's agent, someone who's working on your behalf. Listing agents, which was what I was for the bank, listing agents don't generally want to work with buyers. Why would you say? Why is that? But because we're busy. I mean, a listing agent has a crazy amount of stuff to do constantly. I went out of my way to avoid working with buyers. We had an entire dedicated buyer team to handle our calls that were for showings. I did not have that kind of time on my hands to be running out and showing properties all day long. I had, 50, 60, 70 different files on my desk at any given time with 20 or 30 active listings. I was busy. The most common misconception I hear in the foreclosure business is that investors think that if they work with the listing agent, they're going to get a discount on the property. That is 100% absolutely not the case. The listing commission is set by the bank. It's usually, let's say, 5%. The bank says, I will pay 5% of the sales price to sell this property. Then the listing agent puts it in the MLS and either offers 2.5% or 3% to a buyer's agent. So the investor thinks, oh, if I work with the listing agent, the bank won't have to pay the buyer's agent's commission. They'll pay that commission regardless because the commission split is negotiated between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, not the seller. The seller has already agreed to pay whatever they've agreed to pay. The listing agent pays the commission to the buyer. They split the commission based on their agreement. So that commission is getting paid regardless, whether you work with a listing agent or not. If you want them to write the offer, they'll be happy to, I suppose, especially if it's cash, because that's money in their pocket. But they will not be working for your needs. A listing agent represents the bank. They don't work for you. I'm not going to go so far as to say they don't care about you. They do have a duty to you as a consumer, but you're not their client. Their client is the bank. But a main reason that you need to get an agent is that they have the most up-to-date information. The listing agent, of course, will have up-to-date information, but a buyer's agent can get most of that as well. And the nice thing is if you are loyal to a buyer's agent, and what I mean by that is you work with an agent once, the next time you want to do a deal, you call that same agent. As a repeat customer, you have a much higher value to them, and they're going to go out of their way to make sure that you have information and that they're going to kick deals your way. So when I was working on the buyer side, I had my little list of investors I worked with, and as soon as I knew something was happening, because I had a very close relationship with listing agents, this is before I became one myself, I would, touch base with them. Hey, you got any good deals coming up? Oh, well, actually, listing agents are happy to share information with buyer agents that they do a lot of business with. When I was a listing agent, I had my favorites. I would call them up. Hey, I got a great deal coming down the line. It's going to probably go on the market next week. Just giving you a heads up. You can't show it yet, but I'm just telling you, you might want to line your guys up so that way when it hits the market, you can go to it. So an agent will work a lot harder for loyal clients. And the thing to remember about buyer's agents is that they're working for your interests. You are their client. They have what we call a fiduciary responsibility to serve your needs, not the needs of the bank. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're essentially unrepresented, because that's what you're doing when you work with a listing agent. They don't owe you anything except a few consumer protections, but they can't negotiate on your behalf. They can't really do anything. They can't suggest pricing for sure. A buyer's agent can. So get a good buyer's agent. If you know an agent in your area, reach out to them. So our next topic is going to be on property condition. So we have now covered buyer representation, and I will see you in the next video. So now I want to talk a little bit about property condition. And this should come as no shock to anybody, but foreclosures can be a little dumpy sometimes. Many times the property was neglected. If the homeowner couldn't afford to pay their mortgage payment, they probably couldn't afford to maintain it either. Occasionally, there was some malicious damage done. I've seen homeowners go so far as to remove blower motors off of furnaces and actually go in and clip every individual wire in a breaker box, smash every window, break every light fixture, rip out all of the plumbing, clip all the copper piping. I've seen a person remove an entire kitchen, countertops, cabinets, everything. They just ripped it all out and took it with them because it was granite. It was like a $500,000 house. So yes, even an expensive house can have malicious damage done to it. So don't be surprised. Always expect the worst when you're going into a foreclosure. Be surprised when there's nothing to do. When you go in, you're like, this is actually really nice. Start wondering, what am I not seeing? Something that a lot of people don't think of and aren't anticipating is permits. And this actually came up quite often. And it still is an issue today in the foreclosure market. So if a property has been vacant for, let's say, 6 months, that was usually the magic number, a lot of municipalities will require a contractor to basically certify that the electrical system and the plumbing and the gas lines are all fine before they will allow the utilities to be turned on. So the contractor has to go out, inspect those systems, apply for a permit, then have the utilities reconnected. That process can take days, if not weeks. I have seen it take quite a long time. Sometimes they even remove the electrical meter, so then an electrician has to be hired to go out and have the new one installed, or at least supervise the installation of a new electrical meter. But guess what? Sometimes that could be your expense as the buyer. A lot of banks are very specific when they talk about inspections. They say that it's all at the expense of the buyer. Banks like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were a little bit better in that respect, where as a listing agent, I had to do all that up front. When I took possession of a house, it was my job to make sure all the utilities were connected. I had to either have the house winterized or de-winterized depending on the time of year. I had to make sure that the thermostat was set properly. I had to re-inspect the house all the time. So sometimes that's done up front. But if it's some of the smaller banks or even a HUD foreclosure, that's not always the case. So just know those types of expenses could come out of your pocket before you even have the house. So just be prepared for that. You also need to know that because this is a foreclosure, you will receive no disclosures. You'll get some disclosures, but they'll be blank because the bank has no legal obligation to disclose anything because really there's nothing to disclose. They've never occupied the home, so they have nothing to share. In most states, disclosures are simply the seller sharing their knowledge to the buyer. I know that the roof was replaced 3 years ago. I know that there was a leak in the foundation. The bank doesn't know any of that. They've never lived there. So it's sort of a mystery. I mean, anything before the day you saw the property is completely unknown to you. And you will have no way of knowing any maintenance records. Maybe when it rains heavy, the basement floods. Or maybe there's a crack in one of the pipes underneath the house, and so in warm weather gnats start flying up through the sink or something like that. Those are not things you're going to see when you're inspecting the house unless you have a camera put down there. Those are going to be unexpected things in the property condition you're not going to be aware of, and there's not going to be anybody there to disclose. But more importantly, there's going to be nobody to blame. So you get into the house and you discover some crazy expensive thing that's going to cost you $3,000 to repair. Well, in a normal situation, you might have recourse to go back on the seller and say, you knew about this, you didn't disclose. There's no one to blame when there's a foreclosure. You can't blame the listing agent, you can't blame the buyer's agent, you can't blame the bank. There's no one to blame except yourself. And you really can't even blame yourself. It's one of those unknowns, but you have to be ready for them. So when property condition is brought up, always expect the worst and be prepared for surprises. So our next video, we are going to talk about negotiations, which is really where a lot of people have a lot of questions about foreclosures. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.